Thank you.
Very good. Vanessa. Vanessa is going to give us an overview of the Invisible Achievement Gap report. And I have a reporter call in on one of my bills, Vanessa, so I'm going to step out of the room just for a moment.
Okay.
If you'll start, and I'll be right back.
I'll keep going.
Thank you for being here, and we're going to be hearing from foster youth. And anyway, I'll let you launch, and I'll be right back.
Hi, my name is Vanessa Barat, and I'm a research associate at WestEd, which is a nonprofit research company that focuses on education. I would like to thank the committee today to invite us to present a report called The Invisible Achievement Gap that was published in 2013. And that covers the educational outcome of foster youth in California. So what do we mean by the invisible achievement gap? In terms of education research, there is documented achievement gap for a lot of vulnerable students. That includes racial, ethnic minority students, English learners, students with disabilities. For those students, an educational gap between those students and general education students has long been documented, and some services are provided in the schools. What about students in foster care? The problem was that up to just really a few years ago, we didn't know who among the students were in foster care. We had no way to document a gap. We didn't know if there was a gap. And that study was a first step in that direction. So in California, we had about 6 million students in public school. And about 60,000 students in foster care at some point during the school year. Rather than collect new data, we used a state administrative data set and build a link between those data. We were able to match and build a link for over 80% of the kids in foster care, and we were able to report on over 43,000 students in foster care during that school year. So this provides a pretty good generalizability in terms of the findings that we had. The report is very long. It's over 100 pages. I just want to highlight a few of the findings out of the report. A first set is looking into program participation and school characteristics for kids in foster care. And we did compare them to low socioeconomic students and all students in the state. The reason was that our partner in child welfare research had a strong assumption about the relationship between poverty and child welfare, and they were expecting to see a similar profile of students. This is actually not really what we found. We found students who, in terms of demographic characteristics, but also program participation, such as special education or English learner, were quite different from students in the state and from low SES students. Our students in foster care were much more likely to be eligible for special ed at twice the rate, over twice the rate than other students. And they were less likely to be English learners. We really wanted to look at school mobility. That is an important factor for that population. And indeed, we found that out of that school year, only about 2/3 of the kids stayed in their school of enrollment as of September. Most of the other students, as you can see, stay in their school. Over 90% of students stay in the school where they enrolled in fall. 1/3 of our kids moved out, and even 10% of them attended 3 or more schools during one single school year. We looked at school performing level, and that graph represents the statewide school API and represents So a rank of 1 is a low-performing school, and 10 is the 10% highest performing school. What this says is that actually students in foster care were much more likely to attend the lowest performing school and much less likely to attend the highest performing schools.
I have a question. What's the acronym LOW SES? What does that stand for, that acronym?
Low SES is low socioeconomic status, so it is a mix of being eligible for school free lunch and not having a parent that graduated from high school. So that's why I'm not saying only free lunch. It's a composite, socioeconomic status composite.
Thank you.
Half of the students in the state of California are low SES students. So it is a big group. It's 3 million students. And then what was our purpose in that report in terms of academic achievement and education outcome? We first looked into just participation into the statewide achievement tests. And the first thing we noticed is that students in foster care do not, or at least less so than other students, even participate to the test. You can see all those lines. We are included some other at-risk group. We have lines for low SES again, but English learners, students with disability, statewide comparison, you can see they're very close from the 95% required participation throughout the state. Students in foster care for whom there is no requirement are below that, consistently and clearly below. So they are less likely to come and sit to the test. And when they come, I'm showing here mathematics, grades 2 to 7, and high school algebra 1, but we also looked at English. And everywhere we looked, the main conclusion is that the percent proficient among students in foster care is below all other group of students, or as low as the students that are the most at risk in the state. And in the end, focusing on final high school outcome, we looked at dropouts and graduates. And out of high school, so grades 9 to 12, the dropout rate for students in foster care was by far the highest of all students, even highest than those students that are English learners in high school or special education. It was nearly twice as high as the state average. And looking at our seniors, so focusing on grade 12 students, all those students that made it to grade 12, their graduation rate was the lowest of all student groups. Again, lowest than state average, but also lowest than low SES, lowest than English learners in grade 12, and lowest than students with disabilities. And those are students that made it to grade 12. So the main findings, actually, of that report, going over all those tables, was that our students in foster care have quite a different profile. They're not covered by all those other at-risk subgroups. They seem to be a very specific subgroup, probably with very specific different needs. And the achievement gap for those students is pretty clear. It's probably at least as large as the achievement gap with any other at-risk subgroups in the state. At a higher level, what we see that work showing is that increasing the data sharing across the agency was really instrumental. First, to be able to describe what is going on, to really document that we do have an achievement gap, but also to put us in a better position to even serve those kids if indeed this is going to happen. And since then, both California Department of Education and Department of Social Services have started a much closer data sharing collaboration. The second point is that there is no lack of common challenges between education and child welfare, especially in terms of school stability and everything that goes and derives from it. problems of enrollment when you switch school. And also, we would like to look more into those students that move forward and are so credit deficient that they cannot graduate. So do we need different graduation requirement? Do we need to recognize partial credits? There is something that is worth looking for students that have such a high school instability. And finally, again, the achievement gap is there and is large, and it seems that those students do need education support and services to be able to narrow that achievement gap and to be able to succeed in school. That was a first picture ever in California, and we hope that it will grow from there and hopefully issue better results in a couple of years. So thanks again, and let me know if you have any questions.
Okay, and I apologize for having to place that phone. But, oh, pardon me. Thank you, Amanda. Yeah, I apologize for stepping away. So your key findings of the report are foster kids, if they have the specialized needs, lag behind educationally, and therefore you need to reckon with that and give them support if we want them to be successful.
Absolutely. I think what the report really shows is that those kids are different than the other acknowledged at-risk subgroups in the state that do receive services. It's a different population, so that probably goes with different needs. And the achievement gap that we showed for students in foster care was at least as large than for any other at-risk subgroups in California.
Good. Thank you very much. And next, we're going to turn to Mr. Jackson, because I think you have places you need to get today. Gordon Jackson.
Did you want to introduce him? Thank you, Chairman Cooley. It's a great pleasure to be here today and to share a little bit about an overview and to provide an overview of what the California Department of Education does to support foster youth via its foster youth services program. So I have a lot of information that I'll provide. With my quest has been to answer the questions before they're asked,
yes.
And so I will zip through indeed.
Very good.
In 1981, legislature recognized that a high percentage of foster youth were working below grade level, and that a high percentage were being retained at least 1 year, and that a high percentage of foster youth were becoming dropouts. To that end, the legislation was passed in 1981, declaring the instruction, counseling, tutoring, and provision of related services for foster youth to be a state priority, and they mandated the Foster Youth Services Program. Then 6 core programs were formed, and then in 1998, the Foster Youth Services Program was expanded statewide via a grant opportunity. When we look at the needs, and I very much appreciate hearing the report from the Center for the Future of Teaching and Learning at WestEd, because that invisible achievement gap report has really helped us tremendously to come to terms with just what's going on and what is happening to foster youth that's just so dynamically different than other students. And looking at the significantly more likely to change schools and more likely to be enrolled in lowest performing schools, and I don't want to be redundant, but it was well captured by the previous speaker. The purpose of the Foster Youth Services Program has been to provide academic and support services to foster youth. And the Department of Ed administers this program within the Coordinated School Health and Safety Office. This office provides oversight and management of the Foster Youth Services Program grant. This office also has served as a source of technical assistance regarding education issues related to students in foster care. Prior to the implementation of the local control funding formula, 40,000 school-age foster youth were identified in California, according to the data provided by the California Department of Social Services. Later in this presentation, I'll provide an update of that number of foster youth identified now with LCFF. I'll share with you the primary goals of the program, which include identifying the educational, physical, and social emotional needs of our foster youth, determining the gaps in the provision of educational and social support services, and provide those services either directly or through some referral process with collaborative partners. Identify inadequacies in the completion and timely transfer of health and education records to facilitate appropriate and stable care and educational placement. Improve student academic achievement and reduce student truancy, dropout rates, and delinquent behavior. Provide advocacy to promote the best interests of foster youth throughout the system. So the primary focus of this grant program, the Foster Youth Services, has been tutoring, mentoring, counseling, transition services, thinking of their transition from care as they age out of the program, and emancipation, which in California, at least at 14 years old, they may legally emancipate with a variety of circumstances. The more specific programs and services vary by program and county, and in large part depend on that community's identified needs. But I'll share with you some of those examples of just what this program does, what some of the communities are aiming for. There are collaborative agencies like the county courts, local Blue Ribbon commissions, and they're providing judicial guidance and leadership regarding to the case management challenges associated with supporting the health and well-being of youth in care. County departments of mental health, we provide counseling, psychological evaluations, medication consultation, behavioral management. County departments of social service probation, again, case management, counseling, monitoring. County departments of employment and human services, employment training and assistance. And there are several more of these. I'll just mention a few. County probation departments, monitoring and the reinforcement of appropriate behavior, meetings with family and school personnel, and information regarding placement changes for foster
How do
youth.
those interactions happen at the county level? Who initiates them?
Generally, that person that is identified in the county as that foster youth services contact is really helping to facilitate working with other people in the county to determine, A, what are the needs, and then how those resources are matched. And
So they might be the contact person for the different community organizations or entities.
Right, or
and then help to match up.
Right, to serve as that conduit, to make those connections. So throughout this process, and of course we know the greatest support that we can provide for our foster youth is a high level of collaboration to meet this variety of needs. In fiscal year 2015, there were over $15 million that was budgeted for this program. The funding is awarded to the 6 core programs that started initially back in 1981, and then 55 county-wide programs. Those awards range from $25,000 to $2.2 million, depending on the numbers of eligible foster youth in each county.
It's kind of a, do you happen to know who the author was of the 81 statute?
I do not, but I could find that information for you. In 2013, the implementation of LCFF expanded the scope of serving foster youth in California and contains a number of provisions aimed at improving the educational outcomes of foster youth in California. The definition of foster youth expands, and which now includes youth who are not in out-of-home placement. And this expansion under LCFF increases the number of eligible foster youth to approximately 60,000. So there's the exclusion of the family maintenance that was a part of the Foster Youth Services Code and program, and now the inclusion of family maintenance foster youth in LCFF. Foster youth are now included as a subgroup for which local educational agencies are held accountable. And LEAs are required to develop and implement plans specifying how the LEA is to improve educational outcomes for foster youth. So foster youth are indeed on the radar. The role educational rights of foster youth has been a centerpiece to implementing services statewide. Parents generally have the right to make educational decisions about their children unless the child is in a legal guardianship, parental rights have been terminated, or the court has limited educational rights. When it's unclear who has the right to make educational decisions for a child, the court, or in some cases the LEA for purposes of an IEP meeting, must step in and appoint an individual. Sometimes there's a rocky road. This can affect immediate enrollment, school of origin, and appropriate educational placement, trying to make those matches. The education records for the students in foster care who have special needs can be delayed or hard to access. This lack of identification has prevented some students from immediate access to the special education services that they're entitled to. Children and youth in the foster care system are a prime example of clients served by multiple government agencies, as I shared earlier, including but not limited to CDS, the CDE, the administrative offices of the courts, county mental health and county probation, and other community-based organizations. A key component of supporting children and youth in the foster care system is a multidisciplinary approach intended for proactively identifying strengths and needs and setting educational goals and objectives. And again, I'll reiterate that collaboration. A well-articulated, integrated, and interagency case management strategy can serve as a mechanism for improving the lives of foster youth in schools, both for purposes of improving educational team communication and, perhaps more importantly, for identifying needs, setting goals and objectives for monitoring educational outcomes. I'll talk about the changes with the local control funding formula, which now shifts the primary responsibility of providing direct services for foster youth to LEAs, rather than that being the responsibility of the counties. LEAs are required to develop plans to address the needs of foster youth enrolled in their schools. In addition, county offices of education must now review and approve LEA plans and must begin developing plans, programs, and policies on how to best serve foster youth in schools and assist LEAs in their local plan development. So it's now necessary for county offices to integrate the requirements of CDSS and child welfare agencies and local juvenile courts and other governmental agencies into their practices aimed at serving their students in foster care. It will also be necessary for county offices to integrate into their practices the requirements created by the many recent legislative mandates related to serving foster youth in schools and to be prepared to assist LEAs in the integration of such requirements. So roles have shifted. Best practices and tools can be identified and shared statewide in order for county offices to have access to the most up-to-date resources and strategies for educational teams to collaboratively problem solve and to be prepared to provide this guidance to the LEAs. These strategies and protocols can support the existence of a universally defined set of meaningful supports for foster youth that can be monitored and measured. Some best practices and things that we know work from examples and from monitoring and review. Multi-tiered systems of supports. It's an integrated, comprehensive framework that focuses on Common Core state standards, core instruction, differentiated learning, student-centered learning, individualized student needs, and the alignment of systems necessary for all students' academic and behavioral services. Positive behavioral intervention supports, affectionately known as PBIS. School-wide PBIS is a system of tiered approach to establishing the social, culture, and behavioral supports needed for all children in a school to achieve both social and academic success. School-wide PBIS is not a packaged curriculum, but an approach that defines core elements that can be achieved through a variety of strategies. There's the Interconnected Systems Framework to support PBIS. The use of this framework within PBIS builds from the established and effective platform of PBIS to integrate school mental health programs and services for students with a higher level of need, such as individualized academic or behavior support. And something that's become a common part of a conversation these days is just trauma-informed practices. The use of trauma-informed practices in serving foster youth in schools integrates a number of understandings into the planning and delivery of services in schools. These understandings include the increased awareness in the following domains in school: resiliency, relationships, self-regulation, academic competence, and health and wellness. So school staff, through awareness building, experiences a perspective shift from perceiving behavior as a way to manipulate to seeing behavior as a way to communicate or get needs met. So these best practices are happening in a variety of places throughout our schools, and we fully recognize that there's a huge positive benefit to foster youth who are coming from such diverse backgrounds where more often than not trauma has played a role. I did want to share just a little bit of the good news that we have to share, that the outcome data for 2012-13 show that 72% of foster youth served have gained more than 1 month of academic growth per month of tutoring received. So that's huge. And in 2012,
That says tutoring is very effective.
absolutely.
Kind of help them move forward if they have that support element.
And to
It
make up,
pays dividends.
absolutely, and to make up for that lost ground. And in 2012, year-end reports to the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, all of the foster youth services programs show a positive impact on the educational achievement and success of foster youth in their communities. So definitely moving forward, definitely looking at the shift that's now in place with local control funding formula, but it's great to see the attention that foster youth are getting with the full understanding of, at not their own volition, how their lives have been changed, which of course impacts their educational experiences, and that of course could impact their lives forever.
With that transition to the local control funding formula and locals focused more on these issues, are there ways in which you are able to, the Department of Education is able to kind of share its experience, the whole notion of collaboration? You have been providing assistance statewide to a lot of different people, similar situations. You sort of have a reservoir of knowledge in that type of problem solving. Are there opportunities to kind of share what you've learned with the folks now at the local level who are trying to figure this stuff out?
Absolutely.
Knowledge transfer?
Although the role has shifted, and so the county office and the foster youth services personnel that are funded with this grant are not providing direct services, they are collaborating to support the districts in this work. And that's a very clear expectation about our role to share that knowledge, to share that experience, to share those best practices, to be the conduit to say, well, in Butte, this is working admirably, so what about in Mono? And to do a number of things to ultimately support districts in this new work.
What are there specialized, how do you achieve that sort of sharing the knowledge? Is it done via phone call, conferences?
Again,
Just sort of curious about.
Oh, absolutely. It largely depends on just what works best in that community. It may be working with the district to convene some of those collaborators in the same room. It may be taking full.
I would think just talking would help, rather like our former witness was just talking about, he gets in the parking lot of some of these places and people compare notes.
Right.
I think comparing notes around the issues would help.
Absolutely. And so that foster youth services person that's in the county that is operating using these granted funds would play a huge role in facilitating, a huge role in working with the district, a huge role in determining, well, what's the best venue? If it's a large county, are we looking at taking advantage of electronic technology to have a webinar or to have a video conference? Is it a conference call? Is it just having meetings with select individuals? So, California, as you know, is incredibly diverse. And what matters most is finding that mode that works best in that county. If they're adept and are just very responsive to video conferences, then that's probably likely what they would use to start building this network of support for foster youth.
Okay. Let me just ask here, Vanessa, just since I've got you here, hearing that comment from the Department of Education, do you have any comments or observations or things you would put a spotlight on this transition to local control funding formula and providing supportive services? Just, is there anything that, hearing that testimony sort of fires off for you as someone who's looked at these issues?
I think it's very encouraging. I think that was really our goal as researcher to see that happen, increased local collaboration. And of course, there is still, it's the beginning, so I'm sure there's still some bumps, and there is definitively need of support, but it's increasing collaboration at the state level and at the local level. And putting together the different pieces. You mentioned the court also, not only education and child welfare, but all the partners that are around that child life is important. And it's very encouraging to see the light turning towards also education of students in foster care, which is, after all, you know, the other half of their life, and totally agree, the building block of their future and success. So it's very encouraging, and I hope that they get as much support as they can get.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, with the move of the local control funding formula, it's definitely, it puts different people sort of in the driver's seat and closer to issues and focus on the policy. At the same time, the accumulated knowledge that we've gained with our former structures, it's like you want to, in essence, the public fisc has paid for development of a lot of expertise. We're now sort of changing the strategy, but to the extent that that knowledge is there and experience, we sort of want to find a way, I think, to exploit it and help people shorten the learning curve. You know, it sort of relates to this issue. You know, John Kennedy used to say, "To govern is to choose," a great John Kennedy quote. And the corollary is you need to know the available choices. You need to sort of know what your options are. And as we pass this responsibility for working through some of these issues down at the local level, helping them understand, well, if this is the problem you're facing, there may be alternative ways to deal with it based on the experience to this point is actually helpful. And so it's good to figure out ways to share that and to make it available just so people can understand that there's maybe ways that have worked elsewhere that haven't yet been considered there, and it doesn't mean it's the right thing in this new locale, but if you've got choices, then you can be more deliberate about what we're doing to help kids. Very good. Well, then, thank you very much, Gordon.
My pleasure.
And so we're going to turn now to Christina. It is Christina.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. And we know we have some other youth who are joining us.
It was a little early. No, that's okay. That's okay.